Nice! What a wonderful evening!
Yeah, really. There's like the birds outside. It's like they're having a debate or something.
That's nice. Speaking of debates, do you think we should talk about democracies?
I mean, sure, why not?
Yeah, I mean, debates are really fun to watch. So why not we just talk about democracies and the different types of them and the different types of voting? So, for a start, the word democracy itself is a Greek word which comes from the words demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning rule. So, accordingly, the very first democracies were quite literally people rule, in that this was all the way in the ancient days back in Greece.
In Athens specifically, or
Athens.
the most well-known, or the first one.
So the very first democracy that is recorded in time, you could say, is the Athenian type of democracy. And what they did was basically allow any single citizen to come along and vote. Speaking of which, citizen, that title of citizen was quite restricted. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Generally, what a citizen was if you were male, obviously if you were an adult, if you were not a servant, or if your family was not like an immigrant family, no matter how many generations you had been in Athens. So if you weren't any of these, then you would be able to vote.
Yes, which ended up meaning that you had to be an adult male born in this area whose whole generations have been in Athens, and also not a servant and not a woman. It was very restricted back then, and nowadays all of the voting system and democracy has very much improved through the ages. So let's discuss about nowadays types of democracies. So let's begin over to America. And as you can see, this is the great United States of America. And the system here will just start with the traditional, the leaders. So in America, the head of state and also the head of government are the same. He's the president of the United States of America. And so he takes on both of those roles, and he is elected almost directly by the people. The only filter, you could say, was actually the Electoral College, which we have actually made a video about, which you can see right here.
Yep, it's right there.
Right over here. We have made a video about the Electoral College and all about how it works, which is really cool. And it is the system which is used to actually elect the president. Now, coming over to Britain.
Oh, so the leader is a bit different here, isn't it?
Yes.
We have the Queen, who is the head of state.
Yes.
And then we have the Prime Minister,
who is
the head of government.
Yes, exactly. So the Queen is officially the constitutional royal monarch of the United Kingdom, and therefore her official duty is to protect the Constitution and the people's rights, not only in the United Kingdom, but also in other Commonwealth countries.
Oh, so like Canada,
Yes.
or Australia, or New Zealand?
Yes, and also most Caribbean countries as well over here. Most of these Caribbean countries are actually officially ruled by the Queen. So this is the traditional system, how it works. However, in some countries, like India, they chose to opt a different system. So now you have the President of India, who is the official ceremonial head of state, who is elected by all of the members of parliament and also the state assemblies. So you have the president, but really the person who actually runs the country is the prime minister, who is the head of government, similar to how up in Britain the the man who, for the most part, runs the government of the country, the head of government in the United Kingdom, is the Prime Minister. So, this is the basic system of how it works with the leaders. Now, coming to the legislative bodies, and this does mean the systems used for electing the various to put in and sign into law various different bills.
So the
and
bill
issues.
makers.
Yes, the legislators. And these come in, let's take a look at America as an example. We have the Congress, which is a bicameral system. Bi meaning two and cameral meaning chamber.
Oh, that's quite literal then.
Yes, it is two chambers who run the country along with the president. Then the two chambers of Congress in the United States are the House of Representatives and the Senate. And here's how the system works. So let's say that you have a bill about increasing the age limit for drinking alcohol. So this bill will first be drafted and announced in the House of Representatives.
Okay.
And what they then do is go and discuss about it and deliberate on what changes need to be made to this bill to suit it for the people of the country. So it's basically a sort of discussion
Okay.
that goes along, and they debate about the topic. And eventually, it comes to a vote in the House of Representatives. So what happens is, if the House of Representatives votes majority yes, then it passes on to the Senate.
Oh, so it's like tiers, sort of.
Yes.
So if it passes the first one, then it goes to the second one for even more debating. And if they accept it, then it goes to the president, right?
Yes, exactly. So the Senate will then deliberate on it even more. If they pass the bill with little to no changes, then it goes right to the president, where he will either sign the bill into law or he will veto it and say, nope, you have to do the whole process over again. At which point, they will have to do the entire process.
So basically, it's
again.
the stages where you first have the bill being debated about in the House of Representatives.
Yes.
And then it goes up into the
Senate.
Senate, yeah. And then it goes into the president.
Yes, exactly. So that is the basic system used in America. In Britain, it's slightly different. We have the Parliament of the United Kingdom, which is separated into the House of Commons and the House of Lords.
Oh, okay.
So it's pretty much the same procedure. The House of Commons, a member of Parliament, or MP of the House of Commons, drafts up a bill and presents it to the House of Commons for deliberation. And if they say majority yes, then it goes to the House of Lords, who debate on that even more. And then if they say yes, goes to the Prime Minister, and then the Queen will eventually give her royal assent, which certifies and passes the bill straight into British law.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
it's slightly the same. It's basically the same thing with the additional inclusion of the Queen. And
Yeah, that makes sense because we have the state and then the government.
yeah, that makes sense. And then India basically follows pretty much the same process with the Parliament of India, although it's actually separated into the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. The Lok Sabha meaning People's Assembly, Lok meaning people, Sabha means assembly, and then the Rajya Sabha, which is, well, Raju is king, so it's King's Assembly, or Lord's Assembly,
So-
the House of Lords.
So it's basically the House of Commons, the House of Lords, but in India.
Yes, translated into Hindi. Now, the Lok Sabha, and that goes along with the House of Commons over in the UK, they're both, of course, elected by the people. It's Lok, which means people, and it's the House of Commons. So, of course, the common people, the people, will elect the Lok Sabha members. But for Rajya Sabha, or the House of Lords, it's slightly different. In India, they're mostly elected by the party. based on the number of MPs and also the numbers of MLA, member legislative assemblies in the states. So it depends on that, and also who the parties really, want to be as an MP in the Rajya Sabha. And over in the UK, basically the system in the UK was that, of course, House of Commons elected by the people, but the House of Lords, slightly different. You have several different methods for electing them. So you can either have something known as you have hereditary lords, it's a hereditary position. If one of them dies, then their son goes on. And then the next type would be the bishops in the Church of England, because if you know how to run a church, apparently you also know how to run the country as a whole. So you have the bishops in the Church of England, along with a few other religions as well. Then you have the Appointments Commission, which is basically a space for allowing them to be elected based on people who have sufficiently contributed to British culture and so on. And finally, you have those who are nominated by the Prime Minister. And over in America, I believe this is the best system because both the House of Representatives and the Senate of the United States of America are elected by the people. And I believe that, personally, is the best system for the legislative bodies because it's the people's wish.
That makes sense, because in that terms, it's the closest thing we have to a true democracy, or, a modern democracy.
Yes. So now the important question remains here, how are they elected? And so this is what we are now going to discuss, the voting methods. Now the traditional way to, vote is the traditional system where you have everyone votes, the party with the most votes will win the election. This is commonly called first past the post or winner take all. But to be fair, there might be a slight problem with it, which is called the spoiler effect. So let's say you have two parties, the red party and the blue party. But what if, say, a third party joins, called the purple party, and the purple party is most comprised of people who like the blue party, but very much hate the red party. So now what happens is that the blue vote is split, and the red vote wins the election despite making more people unhappy.
So that's if that's the case, then that's going to be a big problem for this method. So there should be an alternate method, right?
Yes, well there are several. One of them is called alternative vote, which is actually being used in Australia.
Oh, that's cool.
So this system is slightly different in that instead of voting only for one candidate, instead you rank them from 1, 2, 3, and so on. So now in this situation, you have the red party, the blue party, and the purple party. The purple party gained the least amount of votes, but all of those who voted for the purple party ranked blue as number 2. So these purple votes go to the blue votes. Now it's clear that the blue vote wins the election, and that's because it is the one which has more people supporting it, although the purple party is slightly different. But the purple party supports the blue party more, so those votes are added, and the blue party wins the election.
Although, no matter how good of an idea this seems, the reason why it's not implemented in countries like the UK or America is mainly because in these countries we have two dominant parties. For example, the Republicans and the Democrats, and whenever you have this alternative voting idea, it doesn't favor them. So they're like, no, this is a bad idea, and that's kind of why we don't have them anymore. Why we don't have them at all.
So that's why when the UK made a referendum to say, do you want to switch to this new alternative vote system? And then both of the major parties, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom, just campaigned to say, no, don't do doesn't pass, and Britain is now with still the first past the post system. Now, there is one very interesting system which is called proportional representation, which is actually being used in Israel.
Oh, that's interesting. What does this mean? What does this type of voting mean?
So proportional representation is a system in which instead of having two different parties and then they all go in all at once and then you have different constituencies, instead of having to do all of that, what you instead do is just give them the amount of seats in the legislative body which is proportional to the number which they had, which is proportional to the amount of votes that have been given by the people. So this is a very good system which is used in Israel, so that, let's say, if there's 100 seats in the legislative body, and let's say a Republican Party gets 26 seats, then, well, if the Republican Party gets 26% of the vote, then they will gain 26 seats in the legislative body. So this is how it works in Israel, and it's very neat. Although there is a little bit of chaos that results out of this, and that sometimes there's just so many candidates, and I don't mean like 5 or 6, which may sound a lot. No, I mean 14 different, all major candidates with a somewhat high chance of winning.
All of them?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
They have quite large chances of winning each one of them. So what you get is a situation, and this happened in 2019, where none of the candidates gains a majority.
Oh, hey, then what happens then?
Well, then they have to do a re-election and go over it again, and still it didn't happen. No one gained a majority for the second time in a row. And what did they have to do then? I mean, they can't just do a third one. That's just be a repeat.
I mean, from what I can recall, they made a coalition between two of the parties, right?
Yes.
And they would sort of co-rule the country, I guess.
Yes. So the two major parties, Likud and Blue and White. Likud was being run by the current Prime Minister of Israel, who is Benjamin Netanyahu, and Blue and White was being run by Benny Gantz. And so they decided to create a coalition so that each one would alternatively take the helms of the country for 6 months or so. The problem is that coalition has now broken down.
Oh.
And regardless, Benjamin Netanyahu is also under a huge scandal, so things are starting to break apart slightly.
I've got a lot to sort out then.
Yeah, but there are loads of different systems for democracies and for voting.
Mm-hmm.
None of them are perfect, but I'm very confident that eventually we're going to find a system which reliably works for everyone. And that is what I love about politics. The idea that eventually, even though it's not yet perfect, we have the feeling that eventually we can create a system which works for not only the people but also the parties and also everyone else. Yeah. This should work for everyone, and together we will find that solution which does the job. Whew, that was really fun, and it is such an awesome evening.
Exactly.
Nice. Yeah, and by the way, we want to hear how the government system works in your country, so do comment down below.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for watching. Love you, Akash.
And Amrita.